All right, thank you all for joining us. We are so happy to have everyone together today. I'd love to know who's with us. If folks can just chat in the chat box and let us know if you'd like to share your name, maybe what organization you're representing, but more importantly, we'd love to know where people are joining us from the country. So if you'd like to share the city and state at the very least, we'd love to see who we have on the line. I'll let you all take a minute to do that.
Women's Aid in Dublin, Ireland.
Oh, wow. We have some international representation. That's amazing. I'm so excited to see that. Thank you.
Alaska. Virginia. Awesome.
Perfect. So exciting. We're so glad to have you all here. And it looks like we have national and international representation today. Very great. So thanks again for joining us. My name is Elena Schlachta. I am the training manager here at the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and I am so excited to be able to facilitate this conversation with you all. So the purpose of our conversation is to really honor the voices and experiences of people who have experienced intimate partner violence in their lifetime, and ultimately to share with you all and to get the message out there about what are the best ways to support people who have in the past experienced intimate partner violence, who may be currently in an abusive or an unhealthy relationship, or who may find themselves at one point in the future with an abusive partner. How can we best support those people? That's what the key messages we'll end up sharing with you all today. So during our time together, we will hear stories from two survivors, what their experiences were like being in an abusive relationship, what they needed when they were in an abusive relationship, and the support that they found most helpful from their friends and loved ones. We will have some time at the very end of the conversation to take questions and have hopefully a more rich dialogue. And so as you listen to us today, take note of some questions you have so you can be prepared to share those questions with us later on in the hour. So without further ado, let's get started. So domestic violence affects, as you all can see, many, many people. And the statistic that we have is specific to the United States. And we know that, of course, domestic violence is not just a phenomena for our country. Domestic violence affects everyone globally. And the one thing that people don't often know is that domestic violence doesn't just fit one type of person or even one gender. That in fact, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will in their lifetime experience severe physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner. And 1 in 3 teens will in their lifetime as a teen experience some form of dating violence. Additionally, domestic violence affects people from all races, from all levels of income, from all different professions. There really is no typical case, no typical person that experiences intimate partner violence. And the stories, the survivor stories that we share today, I hope will paint a picture of the true diversity of the experiences of intimate partner violence. So we have with us today 2 guests, Maribel and Anitra. They'll be sharing their stories. And we'll go through 3 very basic questions. And the first question I'm going to pose to Maribel, I'll pose to Anitra, actually. Anitra, tell us about your experience as a survivor.
Okay. Thank you, Elena, and thank you all for joining us. My experience with domestic violence or dating abuse happened shortly after, while I was actually in college. My ex-partner and I had gone to the same high school, and then after college, we started a relationship, and I went away for college, so it was actually long distance at first, and there were a couple of different red flags that I didn't really think, were dating abuse, because that's not what I thought domestic violence looked like. So he would often accuse me of cheating or question who my friends were, or, if I was going to parties and things like that. And I just thought it was typical behavior, once you're in a relationship. And then I ended up moving back home, and we moved in together. And then the relationship just kind of continually spiraled out of control. There were a lot of trust issues, a lot of controlling behaviors. He tried to, look through my phone, things like that, control who my friends were, tell me what I could and could not wear. And then shortly, we were living together for a few months. I found out that he was actually cheating on me. So I ended the relationship and told him that I thought it was over for good. And then a week did that, he asked me if he could have another chance. And when I told him no, he became upset. And I'd seen him upset before. He would punch walls and yell and things like that. And I just thought, that's just how he displayed his anger. But this time he hit me and he continued to physically assault me. And then he threatened to kill me. And luckily a roommate was there, and she was able to get me out of the bathroom and called the police, and he was arrested. And yeah, after that, I thought that would be the hard part, but the hard part actually came after talking to other people and sharing my experience with them and what I went through, and just kind of the responses that I got. I felt like it was really my fault. And since I missed a lot of the, quote unquote red flags or signals, that I may have deserved it or I should have known better. And so that really made my experience a lot harder. And considering when I was in high school, I had done, I participated in teen dating violence awareness, and I tried to educate my peers about, dating abuse. And the fact that I thought I had this knowledge, and yet even when I experienced it, I still couldn't label my relationship for what it was. And so I had to deal with that as well. But then I encountered the hotline and Love is Respect and learned what a healthy relationship is and dating abuse and unhealthy relationships. And just having that awareness and knowledge now, I was able to move past my experience and learn more about myself and what I went through.
Thank you for sharing that story. And, I want to just underscore, the key pieces that dating violence happens at any age. And unfortunately, there are a lot of misconceptions around that we should know better, that we should have the information. And unfortunately, Anitra's story is one where she was left feeling like it was her fault. And we hear that here at the hotline from many, many different survivors. And again, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being honest with your experience. Maribel, will you share with us what your experience was like?
Absolutely. Thank you, Helena, and that was beautiful, Anitra. I so much agree with you because every experience is definitely unique. My experience is one that took me a very long time to figure out that it was a story of domestic abuse. I met this person at a time in my life where we were both perhaps at the peak of our careers, both professionally, financially. We both had marriages that had ended and were ready to start life all over again. So we thought we were at the right place at the right time. And certainly it felt like the stars had aligned since the beginning, but that did not last very long. What I did know going into this 4-year relationship, which I'll try to minimize here, is the fact that I was getting involved and pretty much falling in love with a person that suffered from a mental health condition that I did not know about, that he had hidden from me, and but all the signs were there from the beginning, from severe depression to anger management issues to what at the end ended up being schizophrenia. So not knowing that, but eventually getting to know him as a person, we engaged in a cycle of what began as first my opinions were something that he admired, to all of a sudden my opinions and my decisions were attacks on him, or perhaps I was belittling him to the point of you're going to have to pay for things, to the point of it turning into verbal, leading to physical abuse, and eventually to a financial manipulation and control situation. But what was interesting through it all is that I did not see myself as a victim of domestic violence. I saw himself as the victim of a mental health condition, and that's how he portrayed us. So for the longest time, especially throughout the verbal on the physical abuse, he was reacting to me because he was ill. What I failed to recognize is that many times, especially while he was under medication, he was in full control of what he was doing, and we had engaged in a cycle where I didn't recognize what was happening, and it took for this cycle to escalate to the point of not only one, but twice. It led to an extent where my life was put in danger, that I had to realize that if I did not leave at that point, I may not have a third chance.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I hope that you all who are listening took away the real diversity of the experiences of Anitra and Maribel. There were different times in their life. Someone was in college. Anitra was in college. She was younger. And then Maribel was in a place in her life where she was very successful in her profession and was dating someone and then ended up marrying someone who was also equally as successful. And I'll share in conversations that I've had with Maribel that from the outside, their relationship looked perfect, and no one knew, and no one suspected at all that there was anything going wrong.
And I'll be happy to add, I mean, we were in circumstances where we were referred to as a power couple, and I've had people come up to me to ask me for relationship advice and co-parenting advice because we were both divorced single parents from previous relationships. So I realized that I had engaged in this circle of a facade where I had people looking up to us because we had put up this front, but at the end we were living in secret. And in my opinion, silence is the number one enemy of domestic abuse. As long as you keep it silent, it's going to thrive, it's going to grow, and it's going to get worse. So speaking up is just the way to go.
And we thank you both for speaking up with us today. It's through sharing stories, it's through honoring the voices and the experiences, the suffering, but also the courage it takes to make changes in your relationship, whatever that looks like. And we'll talk in a minute about how those changes were made and the supports that were most helpful to ultimately get you into a safer place, which we'll talk about later is not always leaving, at least not right away. A couple other things just from the stories that you both shared that I want to point out. You may have heard some various types of abuse. So we heard something called financial or economic abuse, which is where an abusive partner might prevent someone from working or withhold paychecks, or there's any number of ways that someone can manipulate the finances within a partnership. We heard that in both stories. We heard that physical abuse wasn't present right away. And now both of you didn't share exactly how long it took, and we don't have to know before physical abuse did become present. But there's a real misconception in our society that abuse is physical. And I hope that you all will leave this conversation really understanding that, and maybe many of you do, that abuse doesn't look just one type of way. We heard about emotional abuse, and that can be name calling, that can be making someone feel lesser than, that can be any number of things that has a real psychological impact. And oftentimes when we talk with survivors here at the hotline, it's the name calling and the psychological abuse that actually has the longest impact. It takes a long time to recover from being in a partnership with someone who makes you feel like you're worthless or makes you feel like you're powerless for as long as that relationship lasted. So I just hope you'll walk away from this conversation understanding the diversity of the types of tactics that abusive partners use or that survivors may experience. And unfortunately, it's complicated, and people don't always recognize some of the things that are happening. Like Anitra said, she didn't recognize it right away. And I think Maribel, you even mentioned too, you didn't know, you didn't recognize those signs. And so I just want to underscore those key points. And then the last thing I want to add, just to jump off Maribel, what you shared with us, is this piece about mental health. So there's so many questions that we have around intimate partner violence, and we think, well, why do people who engage in abusive behavior, why do they do it? I think it's this large societal question, and it would be easy for us to say and blame it on mental health conditions. But I want to just point out that because someone has a mental health condition that could be bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, you name it. That does not guarantee that a person is going to be abusive. And in fact, just as Maribel said, that her husband was taking medication, and in fact, he was very much in control of his behavior. And so I hope, again, another takeaway from this conversation is that why abuse exists, we can't simply say it's a mental health issue or that someone is somehow has misconceptions in the head or something like that. It's not that simple. But that it is possible for somebody to have a mental health condition and be abusive. It's also possible for somebody to have a mental health condition and never in their lifetime be abusive. So I want to make that point before we move on.
Great point.
Yeah. So the next question, and I'm sure the question you all are waiting for us to get to is, what support do folks need who are experiencing intimate partner violence or maybe have experienced it in the past? And so the first question I want to ask, and Maribel, can I ask it first?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And when you were, in the middle of this, you said it was a 4-year relationship, and you said that it took you a while to kind of realize what was going on. And you can share at any point in the relationship, but what did you need most?
I would say that's a great point. I would say that first and foremost, I had no vocabulary. I had no real understanding of what was really happening. Nothing resonated with the word abuse in my relationship. Throughout a long period of time, I was led to believe that I was the perpetrator, but it wasn't in an abusive way. It was more of I'm reacting to you. I am not hurting you. I'm just, you're the one putting me down. And I wish at some point I had been able to spend the time to really look into educating myself about what a healthy relationship really is, so that I could have had a better understanding of what I was really going through, which was really an abusive relationship. So I spent a lot of time punishing myself and being angry at myself because he led me to believe that a lot of what was going on, I was the one causing it. When I realized that when you're in an abusive relationship, it's never your fault. No one should ever tell you. Now I know better, but no one should ever tell you that it's your fault. Another thing that I think was helpful, or that I struggled with, and I realized that I needed the most, was I felt very alone and isolated, especially the way that he manipulated the situation and controlled me. I really felt like, there was nowhere to go, and I had no idea, no knowledge that it is so common, and all it would have taken for me at the time, and especially if I talk to others now about my experiences, educate yourself. If I had known that 1 in 4 women are experiencing what I'm experiencing, we're actually the majority. But I felt like this is only happening to me, and so not understanding what was happening and not knowing how common this is just really made this situation so much harder than it had to be. So I wish I had those tools. I wish I had known that there are tools available, that there are organizations like the Hotline that I know now. But when I was experiencing this, and if I can tell a friend now, is there is help available. There are tools. There are things you can do, and most important, you're not alone. So just hearing those things, knowing those things, I came to know them. Perhaps I used to tell myself a little late, but it could have been too late. So I'm glad I got to know them now.
Yeah. And when we, as advocates here at the Hotline, work with survivors and family and friends, we will often coach people to do exactly what you're sharing, is that reminding people that they're not alone and that there are people in their lives that care about them. And even if it's just the advocate that is on the phone with the survivor, to be able to provide that emotional support and just say the words, you're not alone.
It's so important.
It can be really helpful. And I also want to say too, and you'll notice here on the slide, that there is no typical survivor, and similarly, there's no standard way to support people. So what Maribel is sharing is that hearing the words, you're not alone, are really helpful. And I think that for many people, they're really helpful, but they might not be helpful for everyone.
Right.
So Anitra, would there be anything that you would add, or maybe something really different? Your experience could have been entirely different around what you needed. Will you say more about what your experience was like?
For me, I felt what I would have appreciated most at that time was just the space to not know what to do, I think when people hear that you experience domestic violence, the first thing they want to do is tell you what you should do. You know, you should get out, you should leave him, you should do this, you should press charges, you should, you know, all this. I had so many people telling me what to do, and no one kind of asked me, well, what do you want to do? Like, what do you feel about this? Or, you know, I didn't have the space to not know what to do. It was just expected that, you know, this happened to you, so you need to do this. And so I found myself trying to fit myself into that box of, okay, well, if this is how I should behave, then I'll behave this way. And no one really took the time to, you know, are you okay? Like, how does that make you feel? So I didn't really have the space or time to process what I had experienced. I just thought I had to get through it and just put it behind me, because that's what everybody was asking me to do, press charges and move on. So I never really got to sit with the fact that I didn't know what to do, and that I was hurting. And so I wish I could have got just that space and time to figure that out. Just someone sitting with me and saying, what do you want to do? What do you know, what is this, like, how can we help you? Instead of just do this, do that, or this is what you should be doing. That's what I wish I'd had.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to add that, so as the training manager, I train all of the advocates here at the hotline, and we have a segment of our training where we ask the group of advocates to read aloud a poem about listening. And there's a line in this poem that says something around, you can get advice for 5 cents from a newspaper or something like that. Go ask Alice, right? But actually what in fact is most difficult is just listening, and just ask me a question, how can I help you, or what do you need? And not being ready to say what your opinion is, but really just giving someone the space to share honestly whatever it is they have to say. And I think what makes that hard for those of us in the supporting role is that we don't know what's going to come out of somebody's mouth. They might say, I'm not ready to leave. And of course, we, as the loved one, don't want them to be in an unsafe situation. But if someone tells us they're not ready, or they need more time, or they just need some space to figure it out, we need to give that space. And it's hard. But thank you, Anitra, for saying that, because it is so important that we can't push people to do what we think is right, that ultimately each person's situation is so different and so nuanced, so that they are truthfully, the survivor is the only one that knows what's best for them. And so for us to provide that space as supportive people to just say, hey, I'm concerned. How can I help you? And then be quiet. It's the best advice that we can give you all. Great. So the last question that we have that gets us more in depth into this, how to be the best supportive friend or loved one that we can for those who may be experiencing intimate partner violence, is talking specifically about support. So we already heard a couple of things. That one, just give me space to figure it out. Ask me how I'm doing, and then listen. That's a great way to be supportive. And then Maribel, you know, letting people know that they're not alone. I mean, we know the statistics. Now, statistics aren't helpful for everyone because they can sometimes be overwhelming. And hearing that 1 in 4 people will experience a severe physical violence by the hand of an intimate partner is kind of a scary statistic. So that might not be helpful for everyone. But knowing that they're not alone, that's a way that we can be supportive, is just being with someone and knowing that isolation might be a tactic that an abusive partner might use in intimate partner violence. Being there for our people, you know, coming over, sharing a glass of wine, offering to help with the kids, just offering to spend time with someone to make them feel not alone is another way to do that same thing.
Not even talking, just being.
Yeah, just being there. Being physically present can be a way to demonstrate that you care and you're concerned and you just want to be there, and to support someone can be great. So on the sort of flip side, I'm going to start with you, Anitra. Tell us what happened. And I think you kind of alluded to this in the beginning of your story, where people were telling you, oh, you should have known better. Clearly that's not helpful and wasn't helpful for you. But tell us more about some things that people may have done that just really weren't helpful for you at all, even though they may have been well-intended.
Yeah, a lot of my friends or family members, when I did tell them what happened, they thought it would be helpful to make jokes. Or to make light of the situation, just to kind of, I'm not sure what they were trying to do actually, maybe that it wasn't as serious as it was, because when you think domestic violence or dating abuse, it's a scary term. And so instead of trying to make me feel like I was a victim, I guess, they tried to make jokes and make light of what I'd experienced. And that wasn't helpful to me because I was internally screaming like, no, this was really scary, like this hurt. But they just kind of were like, you know, let's just move past it. It wasn't, you know, it's just a one-time thing. I think because it was a one-time explosive incident that maybe they didn't understand like how traumatic it was as compared to someone who may have experienced it for 4 long years.
Right.
So a lot of people wanted me to just push past it, and that wasn't helpful because then I didn't feel like I had the permission to be traumatized or to be sad about it. So
right. Yeah.
I would definitely say what is not helpful is to not taking someone's situation serious, even if it's not physical, even if it's not something that you would deem as traumatic. Take everybody's or anyone's situation serious, because you may not feel as bad as it can be, but for them that might be the worst thing that's happened to them. So I would say just take that into consideration.
And no one deserves to be in an unhealthy relationship. Like, it's never okay for one time someone hits you. Like, that's just never okay. And I think it's back to our larger culture, and maybe even globally, we think about, well, it just happened one time. Maybe the person was really stressed out. They didn't mean to. You know, I really push people to sort of think critically about that perspective, that no, it's never okay for anyone to call you names, to hit you, to threaten you, anything like that. And those are real red flags that the situation that you're in is one that is either dangerous or at the very least is significantly unhealthy. And we, you know, as Maribel mentioned, you know, in how to be supportive, knowing about like what is a healthy relationship. I think that, again, going back to our culture, not every community, not every family, not every school district is there a program that talks to our young people about healthy relationships. That doesn't exist. So unfortunately, many people leave school or they go into college or they're adults and they're in the world and they're about to get married, and we don't know what a healthy relationship looks like until we sort of 4 years into a relationship, we might realize, oh, wow, maybe this isn't healthy. No, now I know what healthy is because I can compare it to what healthy isn't. And so if we have some time at the end of this conversation, we can talk about like what are some of those key, not only red flags around abusive behavior, but also some of those key fundamentals of a healthy relationship. I mean, I hope that being, you know, the work that I do, I'm always plugging healthy relationship education, and I think people find it really useful. And I know, Maribel, you said it would have been really helpful for you in your situation.
Yes.
Would there be anything else that you would add?
Just to add, I certainly agree with what we've been discussing. I agree with a lot of what Anitra says resonates so much with me, even though we were at such different times in our lives, as well as the length of our relationships were different, but there's so many common denominators, and I'll expand a little further into this idea, this notion when you do become public, there's this outpour of support, and I resonate with that so much. People are there, they do mean well, they want to be there for you, they want to make you laugh, so they will make light of it, and that really doesn't help. The other thing that doesn't help is people telling you what to do, and what Anitra shared about her pressing charges. I experienced the same situation not once but twice, and it was a very difficult decision both times that I had to stand in front of the judge and make that decision, and I had everybody telling me what to do, and it was a very personal decision because at the end of the day, the relationship with my former significant other was based in love. We fell in love. I love this person. I still do. I still want nothing but the best for him. I know that we were not well together. I know that he was not in a place in his life where he could be with anybody, but that did not mean that I wish bad for him. So everybody all of a sudden started rallying around me and just started attacking him. After 4 years of our relationship, we had embedded with so many family friends, so many, it was not just a break where I'm going to walk away and my friends are going this way. No, it was a whole community around us that some of them did not want to take sides, and that was very difficult because a lot of our friends in common wanted and continued to be friends with both of us, and that was extremely difficult for me, and I'm sure it was extremely difficult for him. But at the end, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it doesn't really help to talk negatively about the other person. It doesn't make the situation better. It does not solve the problem. And I know the intentions are good and they're well intended, but at the end of the day, that certainly it's not a solution.
I think that's a wonderful point. I'm so glad you brought that up. That on the one hand, you're in an unhealthy or abusive relationship and your partner is doing things that are not respectful, that don't demonstrate love, but yet this behavior doesn't happen all the time.
Right.
It happens, it could be any percentage. It could be 50% of the time they're wonderful and 50% of the time they're not. I don't know. For every relationship, it looks different. But I want to underscore that we fall in love and that love can be present while abusive behavior is also going on. And that's one of the most challenging, difficult things to help to support someone. And of course, as you mentioned, Maribel, it took you a while to kind of go, oh, wow, something's not right here. And that's because love was present. Maybe that's because there was a lack of education around like what domestic violence is or what is a healthy relationship. And so that adds to that complication that we can, on the one hand, love partners who are also abusive. And that's very common. And I so appreciate you saying that. And also the reason to not badmouth people who are abusive, it's not helpful because you still love that person.
Correct.
And it's hard for us who haven't experienced intimate partner violence to sort of wrap our heads around that. But these two very polar opposite things, being in love and also being in an abusive relationship, they do happen simultaneously. And that's part of the complication and part of why it's not intuitive always to support people who are in abusive relationships. Would there be anything else that you would add that was either not helpful or maybe some other things to add for our listeners around things that are really helpful in the way of supporting people who are survivors?
I mean, I feel, especially when you look at it from the perspective of being that person outside of the relationship that wants to help someone, one of the things that kept me in the relationship as well was fear of being judged, fear of not being accepted for who I really was, fear, because for a long time I felt like I was the perpetrator. He made me feel that way. And a part of me questioned it till the very end, until I could finally understand that no one deserves to live in fear and no one deserves to experience abuse, period. And he was the one instilling the abuse in me, and I yet could not understand it. So I guess looking at it from the outside, when you are providing that support to someone that's experiencing and going through all these emotions and all this confusion and all these challenges that makes it so much harder to leave a relationship, is to really come with compassion, without judgment, and make that clear by actions. I mean, it's one thing to say, I don't judge you, but another thing to act it, to really behave that way, and to really make someone feel that they're accepted for who they are, for the decisions that they're making, or for, like Anitra said very eloquently, for just sitting there in that space and just not judging, not telling you, not really just letting you, holding you, really holding you.
Yeah, we want, as supportive people, we want someone to be safe, and we want someone to be free from violence. We want someone to be in a healthy relationship where there's love and there's respect and trust and honesty. And so we might give advice, and as Anitra said, I think I counted should 5 times in a row. You should do this and you should do that. Something I refer to as shoulding all over people, which is never very fun. And so I would hope that another takeaway for you all is as much as we might want to give advice and tell people what to do, and as much as that might be well-intended, really be thoughtful about the impact that that's having on someone who we're simply trying to help. And as Anitra mentioned, oftentimes just asking, hey, I'm noticing that something's different, or I'm noticing that you've been quieter, or whatever you've observed, how can I help you? I'm here, what's going on? And then just listening, so important, and not judging. And we all know that being open-minded or being non-judgmental is so much easier said than done, especially when someone's in an unhealthy situation. But it's not helpful, Maribel, as you're saying, to judge the people in our lives that may be abusive and to badmouth them, to name call them and tell us what to do.
And the I told you so.
Yeah. Ooh.
Not a good word to use.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. So I want to acknowledge, because again, the purpose of this conversation is again, and I forgot to mention this actually, that we're doing this webinar as a part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and there, folks, you all on lines might know that there are lots of other big events going on in this country to support the voices, the experiences, and really the great strides that we've made as a country and even as a globe around supporting people and increasing awareness around domestic violence. And again, this conversation is a part of that larger Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I want to acknowledge, because the purpose of this webinar is to give voice to the diversity of experiences. And one voice that's really missing is the male voice. That I know we have 2 survivors who are sharing their experiences with male intimate partners, but women are not the only ones who experience intimate partner violence. As we saw at the start of the webinar, 1 in 7 men will also experience intimate partner violence, or rather severe physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner. And that can happen in the context of a same-sex relationship, or it can happen in the context of a hetero or straight relationship. And we wanted to have a voice to share that story, and that wasn't possible for our time today. But I want to just say and acknowledge that that voice is not present, and I don't want to leave this webinar and this conversation without giving that presence, because again, we're here today honoring stories and voices, and I want that voice to be heard, even if it's through me, who is not a male. I hope you all think. So, as we can see on the slide, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution to supporting people. And what we've heard today thus far are some things that are really supportive, and different ways to be supportive. And then hopefully you're taking away some things that maybe you've done or maybe you've thought about doing to support someone that maybe aren't that helpful. So I hope that you get to walk away with some new understanding in that sense. We're at about the time where we could take some questions. We do have a couple of other key takeaways, but I'd like to go to the audience and see if we can engage in some discussion around the things that we've talked about thus far. So I would like to give the disclaimer that while we have heard from our survivors, our panelists today share their stories very honestly, I would invite you to ask a question that doesn't ask our survivors to share more personal details. They've already shared enough with us. But again, the purpose of this conversation is to give some context around how to be supportive. And if anyone has questions about healthy relationships or dynamics of abuse, those would absolutely be questions that we could all answer. So hopefully people are typing away, and I'll just give you all a minute to share some questions.
Tina saying, victim blaming and making excuses, i.e. mental health, anger management, is common here in Ireland too. And women speaking about their experiences helps challenge this tendency. Have either women or the hotline engaged with the media to help build a better understanding, and how was that experience?
I really appreciate that question. And as I mentioned with Maribel's story, there is a real misconception that mental health is an excuse for abusive behavior. And we know that that's simply not true. And how we know that that's true? Because there are a number of people in our world that experience any number of mental health conditions, and those people are not all abusive. In fact, many of those people engage in very healthy relationships. And I don't have a specific statistic, but I know that it's a really low statistic around the folks that are abusive and also have mental health conditions. But I think it's a cultural challenge that we experience. I mean, domestic violence as a movement is still relatively new. I mean, if you think about the history, we didn't get funding to support local programs and education and advocacy until like the early 90s. And so there's a lot of catching up that we've had to do around our policymakers, around the direct service providers, to get us all with that deeper understanding of not only why abuse exists, what kind of tactics abusive partners use, but then ultimately how to be supportive of those who experience abuse. And I feel you. It's a very difficult, I think, cultural thing to tackle, are these misconceptions around why abuse exists and ultimately excusing that behavior. I think another way in which abusive behavior is excused is with substance abuse, that people abuse drugs or alcohol and then they become violent. And so what are we doing? We're blaming the alcohol and the drugs, and that might be correlated with the behavior. The abusive behavior might be enhanced or worse or more dangerous as a result of substance use. However, it's still a choice. You know, people who get drunk, they might go crash a car, but it was still a choice to get in the car and drive it. Similarly, it's still a choice to raise your hand at a partner, whether you're under the influence or not. So it's something that we really share deeply here with our advocates, and then also share with our survivors and family, is that abuse is always a choice. There's nothing that we can blame or excuse. The choice to name call, the choice to raise a hand at somebody, the choice to use children to manipulate a partner to doing something, those are all choices that are being made. And I hope that over time we can change the cultural narrative around why abuse exists and make it such that we're not blaming alcohol, we're not blaming mental health, but we're looking at it as a choice, and then what do we do about that? So I hope that answers your question a little bit. And I know, Maribel, you have experience with the media, so I don't know if there's anything you want to add specific around that piece.
Yes, that's a great point. And it is certainly, I would agree that is something that needs to be addressed more with the media. And particularly around the issue of victim blaming, I think the media has done a great job, but there's still, and we see it in high-profile cases, like just to use the case of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard right now, and we also saw it in the case of Rihanna and Chris Brown, where there's still this victim blaming and like trying to justify the behaviors, whether it's gold digging. So I think the media does a great job of keeping some of the stories in the media help keep this conversation going, but I think we still need to work with the media to get those angles and that education a step further as to, you know, there's so many, we do know, and the data does reflect that a lot of women don't come forward because they're afraid to be blamed, and there needs to be a more of a comfort level, and I think, you know, the media can play a double-edged sword on that. So more work needs to be done.
Yes, and I think the media plays a role in shaping how we understand at a cultural or a societal level, how we understand what domestic violence is, why it exists, and what do we do about it. And so it's not an easy fix, and it's not an easy answer, but the media absolutely plays a role in shaping what we know to be true. And unfortunately, there are misnomers around the correlation between domestic violence and mental health and substance use. And I think the media has played a role in shaping that, but it can also play a role in changing those conceptions and those perspectives. So I hope that we'll make those strides in the future.
So yeah, we have couple more questions.
Great.
In rural areas, when the abuser's family is able to manipulate law enforcement and advocates, this is
this is a very tough question, and I'm glad that you posed it. Again, being the training manager, we provide advocates with training around how do you support someone who is in a situation where they have really limited resources. And so someone who is in a rural area, rural meaning maybe there is no local domestic violence shelter, maybe there are no food banks, maybe everybody knows everybody, as this question sort of suggests, and maybe law enforcement won't be helpful, or the criminal system won't be helpful because they're friends or family of the abusive partner. Unfortunately, those cases do exist. And one of the things around supporting survivors is being really thoughtful around when and how to involve law enforcement. And it might simply be that in a case where someone's abusive partner might be in law enforcement or have family and friends are in law enforcement, that's just not going to be the safest option for them to turn to for support. And so back to this message that we've been sharing with you all around, there's no typical case, and there's no one way to support a survivor, and it's for that exact reason, that some survivors' partners are in law enforcement. Some people that they don't have the confidence or the faith in law enforcement to even call the police because they've had bad experiences, such as someone who is an undocumented immigrant or someone who is in a community where the police are not seen as trustworthy. So I hope that the takeaway from this question is that the complication around folks who are living in rural communities and then the added complication of our law enforcement trustworthy sources of support, that ultimately is going to be the decision of the survivor. And so we want to make sure as supportive people that we ask, how do you feel about contacting law enforcement? And would you feel comfortable? Do you feel like they'd be a great resource? And let the person who is in the abusive relationship make that choice. And then if they say no because my partner's in law enforcement or my partner's brother is the judge, you know, we just have to be creative and find another way to be supportive.
This question is, whose responsibility is it to tell the abuser's parents?
Ooh, that's a great question. Whose responsibility is it to tell abuser's parents? Anyone want to take a stab at that one? It's a good question, and I have a couple of ideas to respond, but I've been doing a lot of talking here, so I'm not the only one with expertise.
It is.
I guess, Anitra speaking, I would say it depends on the situation. Unfortunately, in my situation, it was my responsibility to tell his parents because he was arrested, and we were in a different city than his parents were. So I had to call and tell his mother about the situation, and she was not very supportive of me or happy about the situation. But I would say the responsibility should not be on the survivor or anyone maybe in the survivor circle. But again, the situation might warrant the police to be the person telling, or they might be an adult and they need to tell the parents themselves.
That's a great point. And I think it's actually something that in my experience, I have never thought about who contacting the parents of the abusive partner. And that could happen to anyone at any age, right, for any number of reasons. And I think, Anitra, your point about what can we do to not put that burden on the survivor or anyone that's in their community? Because I think for safety reasons, at the very least, we'd want that to be done by somebody else who is a little bit further removed from the survivor or the victim in that situation, and being creative around who that person might be. Good question.
Christina agrees. Question comes from Danielle. What is your suggestion on how victims or survivors of domestic violence who have mental health diagnosis get help?
So I'm assuming that this question means, and type this if what I'm saying isn't what your question is. The question is about someone that has a mental health diagnosis, but is also a survivor or a victim of domestic violence. How might they get help? And so the interpretation here is that maybe the abusive partner is using that person's mental health condition as a tactic, which we do hear about for folks that are in that circumstance. But say you are suffering from depression, or maybe you have post-traumatic stress disorder and you need a certain kind of medication to be able to perform your job or to take care of your children. We'll often find that abusive partners will use the mental health condition as a tactic to maintain power over that person. And so there are some wonderful resources around supporting people that happen to be folks with mental health conditions in an abusive relationship. And one of the key things that I'll say is that if you're someone who is in a relationship and your partner is also abusive and you get health insurance from that partner and you need health insurance for medication purposes or whatever, you can, through the Affordable Care Act, get your own insurance. And if you state that you are a survivor of intimate partner violence, they will waive the enrollment period and get you enrolled immediately to get access to health insurance. That's something that's not well known, and it is something that I think often keeps folks with mental health conditions in abusive relationships, is this fear of, what am I going to do? I'm not going to have health insurance anymore. And so maybe that's a helpful tool for the person, Danielle, who's asked the question. But there are also a number of national resources that specialize in the intersection of mental health and domestic violence. And I think there's a title called, I think it's the National Resource Center for Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. I'm not sure if that's the exact name of the organization, but all of those keywords, domestic violence, Resource Center Trauma and Mental Health. If you Google search that, you would find that resource, and they specialize in the intersection of domestic violence and mental health. So that would be a great resource for getting help in that situation. Anything else that you all would add?
I agree with you.
Okay, great, thanks.
All right. I think that's all the questions that we have.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left, and there's one common question that we want to make sure to cover with you all. And that question is, why don't people in abusive relationships just leave? Very common question, and I'll let our guests sort of chime in with their experience, but the key thing is that it's not always safe to leave an abusive relationship. In fact, leaving an abusive relationship or an abusive partner is the most dangerous time for a victim or survivor, and that's not often known. So we think, oh, just leaving the relationship, that's going to make that person the safest. In fact, that time period where someone is in the process of leaving or has recently left an abusive relationship, it's the most dangerous time. And so really making sure that we safety plan with those folks who are in that situation, and making sure, you know, when you come in contact with your abusive partner, and really thinking deeply about those things to keep them safe is a super important thing to consider. But that's the biggest reason, is it's really dangerous to leave an abusive relationship. And then there are reasons why people have to stay. Like, my abusive partner is my sole source of income, or I have 5 kids at home and I don't want them to not have a mother or a father. So there's a lot of things that keep people in a relationship that make it really complicated for them to leave or to leave right away. And that process of leaving takes time. Anything that you all would add?
I am in full agreement addressing the issue of safety, and just to share a little bit more about my personal experience with domestic abuse. Besides everything else that I've shared, the feeling of shame, and our finances were intertwined in a way that I did feel that he had manipulated the situation to trap me in. It reached a point where my life was in danger, and I knew that all of those were not reason strong enough to just pick up and go. But what I would say that kept me there for the longest time was the fact that I truly feared this person every single time, and he said it very often. Every single time he said, if you leave me, I will kill you and kill myself. Yes. So there was the threat of not only killing myself, but also killing himself, which I also feared that he could do. And so that fear kept me there, and I felt safer knowing that I knew all his whereabouts. I knew that if he was on his medication, I knew his schedule. I knew when he could or could not hurt me because of that. So when it came to that moment where I had to make a decision, because I knew my life would be in danger for the third time and maybe the last time, it was very dangerous. And when I finally left, the fear was even greater, because that did not solve the problem. Now he knew not only that he had lost control over me, and of course there was a restraining order in place, but that did not stop him from being around my new place constantly, or people telling me, I would be at work and people would call me or text me and tell me, we saw him parked in front of your house. And yes, there are tools, and we all know the authorities are there to protect you, but to some extent they can't be. There were many times I called the police because he was outside, and by the time the police get there, he was no longer there. He was playing mind games with me, or he would call me and say, look out the window and watch me kill myself. I mean, there were just, the point I'm trying to make is leaving is not always just the safest thing to do, or it's going to solve the problem. And in my particular case, it took me for me to leave the state. I was living in, and then live in fear for the duration of 2 extended restraining orders. So it's more complex than just walking out.
Yeah, and I think that word fear really sums it up well. That fear is one of the biggest reasons that people stay, is because you know the whereabouts, you know the pattern of behavior of the abusive partner, and if you can at least anticipate that and reduce your chances of being in a violent situation because you know the pattern of behavior, that might feel safer than leaving, which is a completely different situation. And what happens when you leave an abusive relationship, the abusive partner no longer has control. And that abusive partners want control. That's part of the driving factor of domestic violence, is this desire for control over another person. And so when you remove that control, it increases the danger. And so fear is a main reason why people will stay. Anitra, anything you want to add to that?
I would just like to add that in the instance of leaving, that's when the violence in my relationship did happen.
Yeah.
We were not together, and I had told him finally, this is it. And that's when he became extremely violent and did things that he had never done before. So just to highlight or more what Maribel said is leaving actually does, and sometimes can make that person do something they've never done before.
Right, it really increases that danger.
Or the thing he threatens to do all the time that you know he's capable or she's capable of doing, because only you know it. You are in the relationship.
And I want to say that for anyone who is looking for resources, we have a ton of resources on safety planning. Because essentially, if someone is considering leaving, and someone who's in an abusive relationship, they have unique dynamics. They have children, they have pets, they live in a rural area, their partner's in law enforcement. There's all kinds of things that will happen uniquely to each survivor, and that will need to be thought about in terms of what's the best way to keep that person safe. And so we have a lot of resources on the hotline.org website that provide safety planning recommendations. And so if you are someone in an abusive relationship, or you're someone who wants to support a person in an abusive relationship, there's so many wonderful resources on our website. Yes, I'm biased, but I do really believe in the resources that we have as being very helpful tools. So the last thing I'll leave you all with is this thing we call the art of support. And I'm just going to read the things that we have on this slide, because they are the best ways to be supportive of someone in an intimate partner violence situation. So asking the question, what do you need the most right now? And then listening and not saying anything. And then saying something like, I sense that something's not quite right. Is everything okay? I'm here for you if you want to talk. And then be quiet and listen. And what can I do to support you? Or saying you're not alone. These are the things that people have found over and over again to be the most supportive. So if you're someone in a position ever in your lifetime to support a person in an intimate partner violence situation, I hope that you will lean on these particular tools to open the door to support. And also I'll say too, you might say, I'm here to help you. What can I do to help you? What do you need most right now? And someone might say, I don't want to talk about it. They might say, I'm not ready. I haven't had enough time to think about it, like Anitra shared. I need some more time to process. So you might want to give them support, and it might take a lot of time. You might have to ask the question in a different way and give it time. But ultimately, the person who is experiencing the intimate partner violence, they're the ones that's going to make the right decision for them. And the best thing that we can do as people who want to be supportive is just to listen and to not tell people what to do, and to trust that those in this situation are going to make the choices that are best for them. And we just need to be supportive of whatever choice it is that the survivor makes throughout that relationship and throughout that process of leaving, if leaving ever is an option for them. Are there any last, we have about 30 seconds left. Are there any last questions or comments that you all want to share with us?
Thank you.
Thank you
for your thank yous.
Wonder, yes. Thank you so much for your questions. Yeah, thank you for being with us today. We do have a survey that we'd love for you to fill out. If you have remaining questions, if you want to share any feedback around things you found most helpful, please complete the survey. We would really, really appreciate any comments you have to share. And then, of course, if you're looking for more information, if you're looking for support, whether you're someone in a position to support a survivor or you are a survivor yourself, the hotline is here to help you. Our services are free, they're confidential, and advocates are well-trained. Of course, I'm biased on that as well. Thank you again for your time. We're going to go ahead and sign off as it is 2 o'clock. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah.